Hello again, everyone. My coworker is out today, so I'm going to take a little while to go over another fun historical document that I found poking around in our government documents files. Anyway, this is an interesting little final report on marijuana and actual driving performance from the University of Transportation, or the Department of Transportation. Why did I say university? And it's from the 90s, like 30, 40 years ago. Please stop reminding me how old I am. But there's some interesting stuff in it. I'm not going to go through all of it because it's like over 140 pages, but we will read the executive summary and look a little bit at the table of contents. So, marijuana and actual driving performance, the Institute for Human Psychopharmacology, out over here in the Netherlands. Great place to test stuff, right? Because, God forbid, we test on Americans where it's illegal. So contract, final reports, etc. So here's a little abstract to get us started. The report concerns the effects of marijuana smoking on actual driving performance. It presents the results of one pilot and 3 actual driving studies. The pilot study's major purpose was to establish the THC dose current marijuana users smoke to achieve their desired high. From these results, it was decided the maximum THC dose for subsequent driving studies would be 300 micrograms per kilogram. The first driving study was conducted on a closed section of primary highway. After smoking marijuana THC doses of 0, 100, 200, and 300 micrograms per kilogram, subjects drove a car while maintaining a constant speed and lateral position. This study was replicated with a new group of subjects, but now in the presence of other traffic. In addition, a car following test was executed. The third driving study compared the effects of a moderate dose of THC, 100 micrograms per kilogram, and alcohol, a blood alcohol content of 0.04%, on city driving performance. Now, I'll talk about why this is problematic later. This program of research has shown that marijuana, when taken alone, produces a moderate degree of driving impairment, which is related to the consumed THC dose. The impairment manifests itself mainly in the ability to maintain a steady lateral position on the road, which I would argue I had problems with that before I started smoking things. But its magnitude is not exceptional in comparison with changes produced by many medicinal drugs and alcohol. So it's kind of like, there's people driving around with all sorts of narcotics in their system. Drivers under the influence of marijuana retain insight in their performance and will compensate where they can, for example, by slowing down, which is why we're driving all slow up here in Michigan now, or increasing effort, i.e. paying attention more and focusing on the road because you know you're impaired. As opposed to drunks who are just like, whatever, I know what I'm doing. As a consequence, the THC's adverse effects on driving performance appear relatively small. So, yeah, we overcompensate well. Anyway, so yeah, we have distribution statement, unlimited. We can all look at it. It's unclassified. I'll put the link in the description on this one because everyone can go see it. Anyway, like I said, we're only going to read the executive summary. It does have this chapter about a review, simulator, general conclusion, prevalence of use. I assume it's prevalence of use in America. The general methods it goes through and screening out, other illicit drugs and alcohol. And then the pilot study to select the THC doses. This I am tempted to go further down a rabbit hole because I'm kind of like, okay, I don't know what the microgram to kilogram conversion. My husband or anyone else who's watching this that is interested in doing that little conversion for me, please do. Because, yeah, that's some science, and I'm just like, what does that mean in human terms, please? But, yeah, this must have been a real fun study to do. Like, okay, so we just want you to get high, and then we'll figure out, like, how much per kilogram of body weight you consumed. So plasma concentrations, perceived highs, willingness to drive. So yeah, like I can go out, we're cool. Perceived alertness, contentedness, and calmness. I am chill while driving. It is great. Critical tracking tests, and steadiness tests, as opposed to having the DTs, heart rate, intra-subject relations between variables, which is, intra, between, among. Anyway, discussion, exciting discussion. And then we have the driving a restricted highway. So again, the design, the dosing, the administration, lab test, blood sampling. We go through all the tests again. More discussion. And then driving on a normal highway in traffic. Again, the same procedure it looks like. Willingness, contentedness, calmness, all that jazz. And then alcohol and urban city driving, which I would argue is probably the least likely. Yeah, I don't know a lot of people. Well, I shouldn't say that. Aside from people that go and are in the party lifestyle, there's not a ton of alcohol and marijuana overlap. I don't know. Maybe it's just because we're taking over. Anyway, subjects, design, doses, administrations, testing procedures. Same thing again, over again. More discussion. And then this like general discussion, conclusions, and recommendations. Maybe I will. We'll read this a little bit. We'll find out. We'll find out how long the executive summary is. If the executive summary like covers everything, we'll be fine. And then there's these questionnaires and driving proficiency tests. Which I'm a little interested in. A lovely group of abbreviations. And here is the executive summary. So this report concerns the effect of marijuana smoking on actual driving performance. It presents the results of 1 pilot and 3 actual driving studies conducted between April 1990 and March 1992. The program was funded by the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, with the exception of the alcohol part of the city driving study, which was sponsored by the Dutch Road Safety Directorate of the Dutch Ministry of Transport and Public Works. The project was conducted by the Institute for Drug Safety and Behavior at the University of Limburg and Maastricht in the Netherlands. The major objectives of the program were to determine the dose-response relationship between tetrahydrocannabinol, marijuana's main constituent, and objectively and subjectively measured aspects of real-world driving, and to determine whether it's possible to correlate driving performance impairment with plasma concentrations of the drug or metabolite. A variety of driving tests were employed, including maintenance of constant speed and lateral position during uninterrupted highway travel, following a leading car with varying speed on the highway, and city driving. The purpose of applying different tests was to determine whether similar changes in performance under the influence of THC occur at all, thereby indicating a general drug effect on driving ability. Yeah, see, I think I'd just be more prone to zoning out and falling asleep, and that was, again, even before I had issues. Chapter 1 provides background information about the drug's pharmacological properties, prevalence, use, review of marijuana smoking, and traffic safety. THC's effects on the ability of drivers to operate safely in traffic situations have traditionally been determined in 2 ways: from epidemiological surveys of users' involvement in traffic accidents, and from empirical studies to measure the drug's influence on skills related to driving or driving itself. Epidemiology shows people drive after marijuana use, and drivers involved in accidents often show the drug's presence. The results are, however, inconclusive because of the high proportion of cases which also involve alcohol use and the lack of proper control groups. Therefore, the extent marijuana contributes to traffic accident causality remains obscure. Results from driving simulator and closed course tests show that THC in single inhaled doses of about 250 micrograms per kilogram has relatively minor effects on driving performance, certainly less than blood alcohol concentrations in the range of 0.08 to 0.1. So, Chapter 2 describes the studies of the program, certain procedures that were common to all, and these were subject recruiting, compliance with ethical and legal standards, screening for the presence of other illicit drugs and alcohol, blood sampling procedures, and quantitative analyses. Subjects in all studies were recreational users of cannabis, i.e. smoking marijuana or hashish, more than once a month, but not daily. They were all healthy, between 21 and 40 years of age, had normal weight and binocular activity, and were licensed to drive an automobile. It's kind of interesting that they classify that as recreational. Anyway, okay. Again, this is the 90s. We didn't have as much access to bad things. Subjects were accompanied in every driving test by a licensed driving instructor experienced in supervising subjects who operate under the influence of medicinal drugs in previous studies. Kudos to that guy, balls of steel. Redundant control system in the test vehicle was available for controlling the car if emergency situations should arise. Yeah, more kudos to my poor driver's ed instructors. That was one of the last classes, if not the last class to have it, like, provided by the high school. And have like gym teachers teaching it in the summer. Anyway, marijuana and placebo marijuana cigarettes were supplied by the U.S. National Institute on Drug Abuse. Chapter 3 presents the results of the pilot study. It was conducted in a hospital under strict medical supervision to identify THC doses that recreational marijuana users were likely to consume before driving. 24 subjects, 12 males, 12 females participated, and they were allowed to smoke part or all of the THC content in 3 cigarettes until achieving the desired psychological effect. Cigarettes were smoked through a plastic holder in a manner determined by the subjects. The only requirement was to smoke continuously for a period not exceeding 15 minutes. When the subjects voluntarily stopped smoking, cigarettes were carefully extinguished and retained for subsequent gravimetric estimation of THC consumed. 6 subjects consumed 1 cigarette, 13 smoked 2, and 4 smoked 3! The average amount of THC consumed was 20.8 milligrams. After adjustment for body weight, 308 micrograms per kilogram. There was no significant difference between men and women with respect to the weight-adjusted preferred dose. It was decided the maximum dose for subsequent driving studies would be 300 micrograms per kilogram. This is considerably higher than doses that have usually been administered to subjects in experimental studies, typically 100 to 200 micrograms per kilogram. The study provided the opportunity for obtaining valuable information about THC's pharmacokinetics and its pharmacodynamic effects after marijuana smoking. Blood samples are repeatedly taken for measuring plasma concentrations of THC and its major inactive metabolite. The subjects repeatedly performed certain simple laboratory tests, estimated their levels of intoxication, and indicated their willingness to drive under several specified conditions of urgency. Heart rate was measured at these times. The secondary purpose of the pilot study was specifying the relationships between THC and THC-QH with changes in the other physiological performance or subjective variables. Other results of the pilot study showed the perceived high and heart rate are very sensitive measures of marijuana intoxication, which confirms prior findings. Okay. Impairments in laboratory test performance are found at the time of peak subjective feelings, but generally objective impairment dissipated more rapidly than the feelings themselves. Okay, so you might worry about being stoned longer than you actually are stoned. Fair. The first driving study, described in Chapter 4, was conducted on a highway closed to other traffic. One objective of the study was to determine whether it would be safe to repeat the study on a normal highway in the presence of other traffic. The second objective was to define the dose-effect relationship between inhaled THC dose and driving performance. The same 12 men and 12 women who participated in the pilot study served again as the subjects. They were treated on separate occasions with THC doses of 0, 100, 200, 300 micrograms per kilogram. Treatments were administered in a double-blind and a counterbalanced order. On each occasion, subjects performed a road tracking test beginning 40 minutes after initiation of smoking and repeated 1 hour later. The test, developed and standardized by O'Hanlon et al., involved maintaining a constant speed of 90 kilometers per hour and a steady lateral position between the delineated boundaries of the traffic lane. Subjects drove 22 kilometers on a primary highway and were accompanied by a licensed driving instructor. The latter was charged with the responsibility for ensuring safety at all times and was able to intervene if necessary using redundant vehicular controls. The primary dependent variable is the standard deviation of lateral position, which has been known to be both highly reliable and very sensitive to the influence of sedative drugs and alcohol. Other dependent variables are mean speed and standard deviation of speed and steering wheel angle. Blood samples were taken prior to each driving test, and performance and critical tracking and hand steadiness tests, heart rate, and blood pressure were measured after its termination. Questionnaires are repeatedly administered to estimate the high and other subjective feelings. All subjects were willing and able to finish the driving test without great difficulty. The study demonstrated that marijuana impairs driving performance as measured by an increase in SDLP. All 3 THC doses significantly affected SDLP relative to a placebo. The driving performance decrement after smoking marijuana persisted almost undiminished for 2 hours after smoking, while drug plasma concentrations, perceived high, and heart rate elevation had decreased. Marijuana's effects on SDLP were compared to those of alcohol obtained in a very similar study by Lorenz et al. It appeared that THC's effects on SDLP were equivalent to those associated with blood alcohol levels in the range of 0.03 to 0.07. Other driving performance measures were not significantly affected by THC. Intersubject correlations between plasma concentrations of the drug and driving performance after every dose were essentially nil. Thus, driving impairment cannot be predicted by prevailing plasma concentrations of THC or THC-COOH. Driving impairment was also not related to performance in the laboratory tests. Both the observed degree of driving impairment, what the subject said and did, indicated that normal safeguards would be sufficient for ensuring safety in further testing. Hence, the final conclusion was to repeat the study on a normal highway in the presence of other traffic. The second driving study, described in Chapter 5, was conducted to come a step closer to reality than its predecessor. Driving tests were now conducted on a highway in the presence of other traffic. The major objective of this study was to confirm the relationship between inhaled THC dose and lateral position variability in the context of a standard road tracking test. A secondary objective was to measure performance in another actual driving test, i.e. a car following. The third objective was to continue efforts to correlate plasma concentrations of THC and THC-COOH with driving performance impairment as measured in both tests. A new group of 16 subjects, equally comprised of men and women, participated in this study. A conservative approach was chosen in designing the present study in order to satisfy the strictest safety requirements. That is, the study was conducted according to an ascending dose series design where both the active drug and placebo conditions were administered double-blind at each of the 3 THC dose levels. THC doses were the same as those used in the previous study, namely 100, 200, and 300 micrograms per kilogram. Cigarettes appeared identical at each level of treatment conditions and were smoked through a plastic holder in a fashion determined by the subject within a time limit of 10 minutes. If any subject would have reacted in an unacceptable manner to a lower dose, she would not have been permitted to receive a higher dose. 2 subjects at a time commenced smoking. 30 minutes after the onset of smoking, the subjects performed a battery of laboratory tests, tracking hand steadiness, body sway, yielded a blood sample, rated their high and other subjective feelings. They were then transported to a primary highway where the driving tests were performed. 2 instrumented vehicles were employed. The subject performed the car following test on a 16-kilometer segment of the highway for about 12 minutes. After conclusion of the car following test, both subjects then commenced the road tracking test in separate instrumented vehicles. The highway was the same as for the car following tests. Subjects drove 64 kilometers without stopping in about 50 minutes. At the conclusion of this test, both subjects participated again in the car following test. Subjects were then transported back to the laboratory where they rated subjective feelings, yielded a blood sample, and repeated the test battery. Subjects' heart rates registered continuously during both driving tests. So the road tracking test was the same as in the previous study, except for its duration and the presence of other traffic. Subjects were instructed to maintain a constant speed of 95 kilometers per hour and a steady lateral position between lane boundaries in the right traffic lane. They were allowed to deviate from this only if it would become necessary to pass a slower vehicle in the same lane. Data from the standard test were analyzed to yield the same performance measures as in the previous study, i.e. SDLP, mean standard deviation of speed, and standard deviation of steering wheel angle. The car following test measures drivers' ability to perceive changes in a preceding vehicle speed and react in a manner maintaining a constant headway. It began as the preceding and the following vehicle, respectively driven by one of the driving instructors and the subject, operate in tandem in the slower traffic lane while traveling at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. The subject was then instructed to maintain a 50-meter headway, however, the preceding vehicle's speed might vary. After driving in this manner for about 1 minute, the operator of the preceding vehicle released the accelerator pedal, allowing its speed to fall to 80 kilometers per hour, and immediately thereafter the operator of the preceding vehicle accelerated to 100 kilometers per hour. The duration of the one deceleration-acceleration maneuver was approximately 50 seconds, and 6 to 8, depending on traffic density, were executed during one test. The subject's average reaction time to the movements of the leading vehicle, mean headway, coefficient of variation of headway during maneuvers was taken as the dependent variables from this. Now imagine what they could do now if they had all the tech we had. This is 1993, so imagine doing this now in a Tesla truck. All subjects were able to complete the series without suffering any untoward reaction while driving. I guess that's their nice way of saying nobody hallucinated and freaked out. Road tracking performance in the standard test was impaired in a dose-related manner by THC and confirmed the results obtained in the previous closed highway study. The 100 microgram per kilogram dose produced a slight elevation in mean SDLP, albeit nearly significant. The 200 microgram per kilogram dose produced a significant elevation of dubious practical relevance. Okay. The 300 microgram per kilogram dose produced a highly significant elevation which may be viewed as practically relevant but unexceptional in comparison with similarly measured effects of many medicinal drugs. So yeah, they might be impaired, but not as impaired as some other folks. Following marijuana smoking subjects, they drove with an average speed that was only slightly lower than after the placebo and very close to the prescribed level. So it doesn't make us as slow as y'all think it does. In the car following test, subjects maintained a headway of 45 to 50 meters while driving the successive placebo conditions. They lengthened mean headway by 8, 6, and 2 meters in the corresponding THC conditions after 100, 200, and 300 micrograms per kilogram, respectively. The initially large drug placebo difference and subsequent decline is a surprising result. Our explanation for this observation is the subject's caution was greatest the first time they undertook the test under the influence of THC and progressively less thereafter. Reaction time to changes in the preceding vehicle speed increased following THC treatment relative to placebo. The administered THC dose was inversely related to the change in reaction time as it was to headway, which essentially means like if you have a higher dose, then you will, have a lower reaction time and also, keep more distance, hopefully. However, increased reaction times are partly due to a longer headway. Yeah, you can react faster if you've got more space. Yeah. Statistical adjustment for this confounding resulted in smaller and non-significant increases in reaction time following marijuana treatment. The greatest impairment, 0.32 seconds, being observed in the first test following the lowest THC dose. Headway variability followed a similar pattern as mean headway and reaction time. The greatest impairment was found following the lowest dose. Okay, because you're probably like, overcompensate. I don't know. That's an interesting finding. All right. An important practical objective of the study is to determine whether degrees of driving impairment can be accurately predicted from either measured concentrations of THC in plasma or performance measured in potential roadside sobriety tests of tracking ability or hand and posture stability. The results, like many reported before, indicate that none of these measures accurately predicts changes in actual driving performance under the influence of THC. The program then proceeded into the third driving study presented in Chapter 6, which involved tests conducted in high-density urban traffic. There were logical and safety reasons for restricting the THC dose to 100 micrograms per kilogram. It was given to a group of regular cannabis users along with the placebo. For comparative purposes, another group of regular alcohol users were treated with a modest dose of their preferred recreational drug, and again placebo before undertaking These same city driving tests. Yeah, okay. So we're going to have mild alcohol impairment and stoners. Cool. Two groups of 16 new subjects apiece, equally comprised of men and women, participated. Subjects in the alcohol group were regular users of alcohol, but not marijuana. Both groups were treated on separate occasions with active drug and placebo. Active marijuana was administered to deliver 100 micrograms per kilogram THC. The driving test commenced 30 minutes after smoking. The alcohol dose was chosen to yield a blood alcohol content approaching a 0.05 when the driving test commenced 45 minutes after the onset of drinking. Active drug and placebo conditions were administered double-blind and in a counterbalanced order in each group. Driving tests were conducted in daylight. That's good. Over a constant 17.5 kilometer route within the city limits of Maastricht. Subjects drove their placebo and active drug rides through heavy, medium, and low density traffic on the same day of the week at the same time of day. Two scoring methods were employed in the present study. The first MOAR approach required the driving instructor acting as a safety controller during the test to retrospectively rate the driver's performance using a standard scale. The second, a more molecular approach, involved the employment of a specially trained observer who applied simple and strict criteria for recording when the driver made or failed to make each in a series of observable responses at predetermined points along a chosen route. Immediately prior to and following the driving test, subjects performed hand steadiness and time perception tests, yielded a blood sample, and were administered the same subjective questionnaires used in the previous studies. The study showed a modest dose of alcohol, blood alcohol level 0.04%, produced a significant impairment in city driving as measured by the MOAR approach relative to placebo. More specifically, alcohol-impaired vehicle handling and traffic maneuvers. Marijuana administered in a dose of 100 micrograms per kilogram THC, on the other hand, did not significantly change mean driving performance as measured by this approach. Neither alcohol nor marijuana significantly affected driving performance measures obtained by the molecular approach, indicating that it may be relatively insensitive to drug-induced changes. Driving quality as rated by the subjects contrasts with observer ratings. Alcohol impaired driving performance according to the driving instructor, but the subjects did not perceive it. Marijuana did not impair driving performance, but the subjects themselves perceived their driving performance as such, again, overcompensating. Both groups reported about the same amount of effort in accomplishing the driving test following the placebo, yet only the subjects in the marijuana group reported significantly higher levels of invested effort following an active drug. So yeah, drunks don't care. Thus, there was evidence that the subjects in the marijuana group were not only aware of their intoxicated condition, but were also attempting to compensate for it. These seem to be important findings. They support both the common belief that drivers become overconfident after taking alcohol and investigator suspicions that they become more cautious and self-critical after consuming low THC doses by smoking marijuana. Now, we've had this debate at our house on whether or not this particular finding would change with decriminalization. Simply because, like, we're always like, well, most of the reason you're paranoid when you're stoned is because, like, it's illegal. And if it wasn't illegal, maybe you would not be so paranoid theory. So same with, like, the self-critical thing. Anyway, the laboratory performance tests also discriminated between the drug's effects. Hand steadiness was impaired following THC and improved following alcohol relative to placebo. Yeah, I'm someone who can throw darts and shoot pool better if I've had one drink, but not more than one. The difference between the drug's effects was significant, both before and after the driving test. Impairment after THC was about as much as that produced by the same dosage in the previous study, including equivalent sensitivities of the present and previous groups. Production of time intervals was not affected by alcohol, but THC significantly shortened interval production relative to placebo. Drug plasma concentrations were neither related to absolute driving performance scores nor to the changes that occurred from placebo to drug conditions, so people either are or are not good drivers. With respect to THC, these scores confirm the findings from previous studies. They are somewhat surprising for alcohol, but may be due to the restricted range of ethanol concentrations in the plasma of different subjects. Chapter 7 concludes the report with a general discussion of the results of the program and ends with a list of conclusions and recommendations. It starts with a discussion of the THC dose, which marijuana users actually prefer for achieving their desired high. Several questions are raised and discussed, such as how do people regulate their THC consumption, what role plays familiarization with the drug, and what would the preferred dose have been if marijuana of much higher potency were smoked? Yep, flash forward 30 years later. The discussion then continues with the description of the differences between the driving tests in terms of the type of information processing each requires, automatic versus controlled, and the relevance of each to traffic safety. Attention is further focused on the effects of THC on driving performance. The results of the studies corroborate those of previous driving simulator and closed course tests by indicating that THC in single inhaled doses of up to 300 micrograms per kilogram has significant, yet not dramatic, dose-related impairing effects on driving performance. Standard deviation of lateral position in the road tracking test was the most sensitive measure for revealing THC's adverse effects, so stay in the middle of the road, kids. Stay in your lane. This is because road tracking is primarily controlled by an automatic information processing system which operates outside conscious control. Yes, and I can totally attest to that as someone who has a bad 3-depth perception to begin with. The process is relatively impervious to environmental changes, but highly vulnerable to internal factors that retard the flow of information through the system. THC and many other drugs are among these factors. So when they interfere through the system with the process that restricts SDLP, there is little the afflicted individual can do by way of compensation to restore the situation. Car following and to a greater extent city driving performance depend more on controlled information processing and are therefore more accessible for compensatory mechanisms that reduce the decrements or abolish them entirely. So yeah, it's I guess safer to be driving in the city because you're doing more controlled information processing, there's more inputs. I don't know, that to me seems counterintuitive. I feel like you'd be safer in the country because there's less to run into, but okay. Maybe you're just paying attention, you got your head on a swivel more in the city. Maybe that's the theory. It appears that performance is more affected by THC in laboratory than actual driving tests. Several reasons that may account for the apparent discrepancy are discussed. First, laboratory tests are experimentally controlled by drastic simplification, which may affect a subject's motivation to perform the test by making it appear unreal. Secondly, the restriction of response options in laboratory performance tests leave fewer possibilities for compensation. In real life, drivers always apply numerous skills in parallel and in series. Should one become deficient, they're often able to compensate in a number of ways to achieve a satisfactory level of proficiency. Finally, after learning how to drive, subjects possess such skills in abundance, and one can only demonstrate how they vary with drug effects in the real task or a very close approximation thereof. Profound drug impairment, constituting an obvious traffic safety hazard, could as easily be demonstrated in a laboratory performance test as everywhere else, but THC is not a profoundly impairing drug. It does affect automatic information processing even after low doses, but not to any great extent even after high doses. It apparently affects controlled information processing in a variety of laboratory tests, but not to the extent which is beyond the individual's ability to control when he is motivated and permitted to do so in real driving. Marijuana's effects on driving performance compared to those of many other drugs. It was concluded that THC's effects, after doses of up to 300 micrograms per kilogram, never exceed alcohols at blood alcohol levels of 0.08, and were in no way unusual compared to many medicinal drugs. Yet THC's effects differ qualitatively from many other drugs, especially alcohol. Evidence from the present and previous studies strongly suggests that alcohol encourages risky driving, whereas THC encourages greater caution, at least in experiments. Another way THC seems to differ qualitatively from many other drugs is the former's users seem to better be able to compensate for its adverse effects under the influence. Still, one can easily imagine situations where the influence of marijuana smoking might have an exceedingly dangerous effect, i.e. emergency situations would put high demand on the driver's information processing capacity, prolonged monotonous driving, zonk out whether or not you're stoned on that, and after THC has been taken with other drugs, especially alcohol. Finally, the relation between driving impairment following marijuana smoking and plasma concentrations of THC and THC-COOH is discussed. It appears not possible to conclude anything about a driver's impairment on the basis of the plasma concentrations of THC and THC-COOH determined in a single sample. So yeah, even reading that executive summary, that took us half an hour, so I guess I will not do much in the way of reading the back, but I do want to skim some interesting graphs, if for no other reason than to give this, give the robot that does the AI picker for the super exciting, what should go on the top of your video picture. So, okay. Well, these laboratories, left way. Oh, scoring sheet for the molecular approach consisting of the schematic route map with symbols indicating the driver behavior to be scored at each point. Okay. Oh, right turn, left turn through, line change, white change. Okay. Performance variables. Oh, total scores. So you have all this rich detail in here. I like this drug treatment. Lots and lots of graphs. Anyway, I was gonna try to go to the discussion, but like we're already at like 107. Sorry. This is recommendations for future research, so I'm just backing up to see if I have anything. Well, we'll just hit the major conclusions again, and then we'll get out of here. How about that? So, current users of marijuana prefer THC doses of about 300 micrograms per kilogram to achieve their desired high. It is possible to safely study effects of marijuana driving on highways or city streets in the presence of other traffic. Have fun with that. Marijuana smoking impairs fundamental road tracking ability with the degree of impairment increasing as a function of the consumed THC dose. Marijuana smoking, which delivers THC up to a 300 microgram per kilogram dose, slightly impairs the ability to maintain constant headway while following another car. But on the plus side, you're probably not tailgating. A low THC dose does not impair driving ability in urban traffic to the same extent as a blood alcohol concentration of 0.04. Drivers under the influence of marijuana tend to overcompensate the adverse effect of the drug on their driving quality and compensate when they can by increasing effort to accomplish the task, increasing headway, slowing down, or a combination of these. Drivers under the influence of alcohol tend to underestimate the adverse effects of the drug on their driving quality and do not invest compensatory effort. The maximum road tracking impairment after the highest THC dose was within a range of effects produced by many commonly used medicinal drugs and less than that associated with the blood alcohol concentration of 0.08 in previous studies employing the same tests. It is not possible to include anything about driver's impairment on the basis of his or her plasma concentrations of THC and THC-COOH as determined in a single sample. And here's some future research. I don't think we've ever gotten to this, but I'm just going to read through this and we'll conclude. So, future studies should include the THC they prefer to achieve their desired high. Subjects should be familiar with the potency of the material providing it before beginning, designed to measure its effects. Future research on the preferred dose should involve administering them in different preparations and encompass a wide range of potencies. Oh yes, do all the different types. Don't just smoke the cigarettes, kids. Further research is required for determining marijuana's effects on actual driving performance in the presence of other traffic when the driver is simultaneously performing another task or suddenly confronted with a situation that requires a rapid adaptive response. City driving tests should be repeated with subjects consuming THC doses over 100 micrograms. Yes, have a good time. Further research on marijuana and actual driving research should be extended to include combinations of marijuana and alcohol. And further research should extend actual driving performance measures to 4, 8, 16, and 24 hours after smoking. That seems like a long time after smoking to be like bothering anybody. Like, are you so impaired? Like, I don't feel anything anymore. I'm sorry. I did say we were going to stop, and now I am going to the end of this because I wanted to see the appendix. Okay, so high or drunkenness. Would you attempt to drive for a set distance if they are unimportant though gratifying, important but avoidable, urgent? Mood rating scale, okay. Fun times. Perceived effect scale, good times. Perceived driving quality scale. The test you just finished, I drove normally, I drove bad. Driving proficiency test, so, okay. Wheels must be straight, left turns. Okay, so this is all. Alright, so this is not so exciting, admittedly. So proceeding through traffic, how do you follow things? Oh, all this exciting coding. Okay, translation of the word association Verschlag, the word I'm not saying. Word I am so not saying. Okay, so vehicle checks, preparing to drive off, driving off. Oh man, this reminds me of like the 2 times I failed my drivers. No, I only failed it once, that's right. I didn't have to go through 3 times, I just had to go through twice, but anyway. Yeah, this is the sort of thing that, like, it's almost as bad as when I've gotten in so many near messes because I do not understand right away real well. I'll just admit that now. I'm like, you know, whoever pulls up first, I assume has right away. And that has something to do with whoever's on the right of whomever, and I don't understand that part at all. So a lot of the time I'm just sitting here waiting for someone to point at me or me to point at them. I'm like, no, I think you were here first. No, you were here first. Anyway, that has nothing to do with the actual effects of marijuana and THC on actual driving performance. It just more has to do with me not ever understanding right away correctly. And if my husband made it to the end of this video, I'm sure he will educate me about it, because Lord knows he worries about me.